Okay, so the last two I want to focus on are the alarmed and the naysayers. The alarmed are people that have kind of extreme or almost apocalyptic kind of images of what global warming will bring. These are things like bad, 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 like after nuclear war, or death of the planet, okay? Often well beyond the worst case of scientific scenarios. By contrast, the naysayers are people who often have very distinct reasons. It's just not happening, flat denial. It might be happening, but it's natural. I just don't think the science has been proven yet. Oh, I doubt it because based on my own personal experience, there was a snowstorm in my area in Washington, D.C., therefore global warming is not happening. Those that blame it on media hype, and then my personal favorite, those I lovingly call the conspiracy theorists. The people who think it's an outright hoax or fraud, that it's people making up data for their own job security or lining their own pockets. Okay, so that's where we were in 2003. Okay, this is where we were as of a month ago. Okay, we've seen some pretty dramatic shifts in terms of these top-line images that immediately come to people's minds. Okay, and clearly the big thing that seems to have changed is the naysayer responses. And I have to tell you that about half of these are people who say it's a hoax. I mean, that's just what comes to mind. There would be even higher percentage if you gave them the option, but this is, again, what's immediately in their mind. Okay. Now, we wanted to take a look at those two groups and look at them in a more interesting way. And so we took 13 different risk perception items. Don't worry too much about these. They're just different measures of how great of a risk is climate change. We took the naysayers and we looked at their average response and plotted it on a graph from low risk to high risk. And then here are the alarmists. And what you see, unsurprisingly, naysayers, climate change is a low risk. Alarmists, it's a high risk. But where's the rest of the country, at least as of then, was much closer to alarmists than they were to naysayers. Or the interesting way to flip that around is that there's something quite different about the naysayers. They're really different than the rest of the country on this issue. Okay, that shows up in lots of other ways. When you look at a whole variety of policy support, again, you find, perhaps unsurprisingly, the naysayers don't support things. The alarmists are much more likely to support them. The rest of the country is much closer to that level than they are to this level. Also, interestingly, that again, remember the alarmists? These are the people with these kind of apocalyptic visions of what global warming is going to bring. So you may think global warming is going to lead to the end of the world, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily more willing to pay more at the pump to fix the problem. Okay, and one of the other interesting findings is, and I won't go into the underlying statistics here, but one of the interesting findings is the role of values and underlying worldviews. So basically, worldviews about the kind of society we want to live in turn out to be really, really important as mediators of how people interpret the information about climate change. And basically what we've identified is that people with strong egalitarian values tend to care much more about climate change and to be much more supportive of policy. People who are anti-egalitarian in their worldview tend to oppose it. And these are people who don't support affirmative action, who don't think the world needs a more equal distribution of wealth, who don't support government efforts to end poverty, et cetera. Okay? And that's consistent not just on climate change, but other environmental issues, other risks, and other hazards, in fact. By contrast, individualistic values, and to use Dan's terms, these are almost maybe the difference between we mapping and me mapping, in a sense. Here, the naysayers are strongly individualistic. You know, government should get out of our way, that life sorts out those that try hard from those that don't. I mean, we have lots of other measures along these lines. For them, this is not an issue. Okay. Last point that we haven't actually talked much about here, and that's the role of trust. And trust is really, I think, quite important in today's world. I mean, let's face it, we're faced with an ever more complicated landscape of risk and hazard. I mean, every day it seems like there's yet another thing that you're being told, oh, be worried about this. And, you know, I've spent 20 years studying climate change, but ask me to assess the hazards of nanotechnology, I don't know, biotechnology, SARS, bird flu, swine flu, lead in toys. I mean, on and on it seems to go. So trust becomes a really, really critical thing. It's been called the currency of the realm. And I think that's absolutely the case, because all of us depend on somebody that we look to help guide us through this complicated landscape of risk. And so what we see here on the question, how much do you trust the following groups to tell you the truth about global warming? find that almost nobody trusts corporations. Then again, the national government doesn't do generally a whole lot better. This number does change a little bit, especially for different segments, depending on who's in power. But here, the naysayers, definitely don't trust what they would style the mainstream media. They absolutely don't trust environmental groups. This is the last set of communicators or messengers to reach out to that community. They're less likely to trust scientists, and they're even less likely to trust their own friends and family. Why, I don't know. Okay, so basically messenger matters, okay? And this is obvious stuff. You need to know, you have to have the right messenger or people won't even listen to you. I mean, Al Gore has been wonderful at activating the liberal base, but for every person he activates on that side, he at least inflames one person on the opposite side. I mean, Al Gore could say that the earth is round and people would say, oh, no, it's not. Okay, so, I mean, you just got to always recognize the limitations of any given messenger. All right, so we wanted to take this model and we did a much more sophisticated version of it to try to understand who are these different audiences out there in the American public. Many of you have seen this. This is our work to identify 6 distinct Americas within the United States, each of these groups quite different from one another, each with different demographics, each with different value systems, each paying attention to different news sources. And so if you want to reach out to them, you really need to be thinking about a tailored approach with each one. The alarmed, this is people who believe that it's happening, it's human-caused, it's a very serious problem, they're already taking action in their own lives, they want to know what's the next thing I can do. Okay, this is what, in fact, John has entitled in his own work, an issue public. Okay? These are the people who are the most engaged with this issue, they're the ones who are most willing to take political action on this issue. The problem, however, is that they don't realize that they exist. Okay? By comparison with, say, the gun rights movement, or the pro-choice movement, or the anti-abortion movement, all of whom see themselves, I mean, it's become part of their identity. This is who I am. Okay? I think most of these people don't even know that they exist as a group. They feel somewhat isolated. Yeah, I've got some friends who feel the way I do, but I don't realize that I'm actually part of a whole group of people across the country. And I think one of the main needs is to really activate and organize and mobilize that particular community because they are the early adopters.